Hi, everybody. My name is Gurwinder Sidhu, and my presentation today will be on Microsoft gaming and the future of the metaverse. So what sort of highlighted my research or what inspired it was earlier this year, Microsoft announced it was going to acquire Activision Blizzard, a major video game publishing company, for $68.7 billion. Other than the sheer amount of money, what made this acquisition notable was the fact that Microsoft made a statement that this acquisition will highlight or will help influence the building of the foundation of the metaverse. So this spurred me to examine the specific case as well as the gaming industry as a whole as emblematic for what's to come next, not just from Microsoft, but from big tech players as a whole as they attempt to build and shape the metaverse and the lessons and risks we can sort of take away from that. To start off with, it's kind of really difficult to actually conceptualize the metaverse, given that it's something that doesn't actually exist yet. It exists purely in a conceptual framework, and a lot of the times what that conceptualization actually means can shift depending on who's talking about it. But in some ways, that in itself is the opportunity that's present here. A lot of tech companies are looking at this, looking at the metaverse as something aspirational and looking to be the ones to actually build the metaverse and to decide the rules and standards of what it will be and how users will interact with it. A few generally accepted ideas or generally accepted conceptualizations of what it might look like is an interoperable space and manner of interacting with the internet, where data information can seamlessly be shared across platforms through a digital world that you can walk around in, or like you can interact with, typically with a virtual avatar that you can customize and edit. That really highlights interaction, communication, and immersion into the data experience. And largely through a lot of people believe that's through virtual reality and augmented reality devices that you'll be able to access the metaverse, because it'll create an immersive space as well as a way to transform the physical reality around you with digitization. And in this regard, there's a lot of association we can make with gaming and the metaverse if we understand it as a digital environment that's being constructed, particularly because it's the video games industry that has historically built virtual interactive worlds that people can engage with. And when we look at a lot of early conceptions and academic discourse surrounding the metaverse and what the metaverse might look like, they turn to several specific games to look at like what the metaverse will be, how it will interact, and what it will realize into. A lot of the gaming industry itself has also been an early adopter of a lot of technology that the metaverse will potentially be built on top of, VR and AR in particular, but we also see this in motion capture technology, the various sort of recording softwares, and even to a lesser degree, blockchain as of recent years. We can also look at the gaming industry as a method of dispersing ancillary devices and technologies necessary to access the metaverse or accessing different innovative processes. For VR in particular, people got into VR because they wanted to get into VR games. That was the interest, that was the hook. And now people who own VR devices can potentially in the future hook into the metaverse. Finally, the potential for interoperable connections was laid out in the gaming industry. Historically, competition in the gaming industry has been defined by software, aka the games, being unoperable in competitive hardware, competitive systems. But we've also seen, even as of late, increasingly more games that are operable across all devices or as many devices as possible, and a point of connection, which, given the metaverse and given the metaverse's goals of an interoperable internet, interoperable digital space, this lays the groundwork for that potentially. Well, what's also there when perceiving the metaverse is this statement that the metaverse is simply big tech but bigger. That's a large concern amongst analysts that the metaverse is nothing more than a catch-all phrase being used by several industries to justify both consolidation and an expansion of corporate power. So in Microsoft's case in particular, Microsoft has acquired about 226 different companies total since the 90s as of March 31st, 2022. So if we look at Microsoft as an indicator of how tech giants will approach building the metaverse, what we can see is not just investment, but mergers and acquisitions into industries, particularly in the gaming sector, that in their efforts to shape the metaverse and set the standards of the net. And Microsoft in particular has had a long history of sort of shaping how we as users interact with the net and sort of interact with digital spaces in particular, not just in its hardware creation, but in the software that we use and its software that it's built and acquired throughout the years. It's just currently the dominant operating system for PCs across the world. And when we look at all devices total, it's the second largest, falling just behind Android with the rise of mobile devices. Nonetheless, it has had a long history of actually shaping how users can actually access, use, and interact with the net, giving it a potential advantage in shaping the metaverse. In the gaming industry, this has been highlighted and exaggerated even more so than in computing in general. Microsoft not only is a dominant player in the hardware and software sector through its console gaming, but in the PC market as well, it's one of the only major players. I took some data from Steam, which is a PC gaming marketplace where people globally can purchase and play games. And Steam itself has aggregated data in a 48-hour period amongst 27 million concurrent users. What I found amongst that data is that 96% of users who use Steam in that 48-hour period were using a Windows operating system. This sort of shows a dominance of Windows across the platform in PC gaming. But if we apply this to a metaverse context and under the realization that gaming and how gaming is built will influence how the metaverse is built, this sort of suggests to us that through Microsoft products or through whatever tech giant dominates the metaverse will become the primary way that the metaverse can actually be accessed, revises concerns of how will other firms sort of get in terms of their hardware and their interaction. In terms of major implications for the net and Canada as a whole, the first major one, which is sort of already touched upon, was the interoperability concerns. So created services and software that will be developed for the metaverse, once it's realized, can only be accessed or can only be reasonably accessed through services created by the dominant platform, Microsoft in this case. There's also a concern of regulatory capture, as a company that sort of dominates the space has the most control over what the space is, what it's capable of, and how it can sort of deter regulatory action by sort of justifying, hey, what you want isn't possible. There are concerns about market and competition, about creating sort of a data moat and a data advantage amongst Microsoft as a major competitor for shaping the internet. It already has a large advantage in the modern digital services. And when we look at the potential for setting the standards for the future of the metaverse, it could even have an even better way of sort of pushing out competitors, potential innovators that could benefit the internet by sort of maintaining the standards and stakes. Finally, the big tech but bigger point, we will see amongst firms like Microsoft, Meta, and other firms and other companies that want to shape the metaverse, more acquisitions, more mergers, more investment in this sort of sense. What this means for Canadian businesses is a concern and a risk of acquiring Canadian talent and companies that could foster the Canadian economy and just sort of shifting them under a big foreign entity. There are several policy options that I wanted to discuss that could be done to address these concerns. The first major one has to be an antitrust breakup, which is sort of the classical approach to addressing monopolization and conciliatory power. Basically, breaking up any power of companies that can be deemed gatekeepers of services or gatekeepers of technology in the metaverse context. I want to borrow designing this framework from the EU Digital Markets Act, which was designed to regulate platform economies, platforms that deter competitors that want to use the platform. I think we can adjust that framework into a metaverse sort of context, sort of make that framework for deciding when intervention needs to take place. I also wanted to discuss legislating interoperability amongst acquired firms and future mergers and acquisition. So once a firm has reached a certain, say, economic threshold, a certain influential threshold in terms of power dominance, then there should be a guarantee that whatever firms they may purchase in the future, that whatever sort of talent or whatever sort of assets they acquire from that will remain operable in its creation. In the context of Activision Blizzard, the employees, the data that they took from that company should remain operable on all services in this context with what I'm proposing. I also wanted to talk about preemptive standard setting. While we can't say for certain what the metaverse will look like, we can make assumptions, and we can make assumptions about what it shouldn't look like. And if the state does that, we can sort of put the ball in our, take the ball away from firms' court in terms of setting the standards of what the metaverse might be, by sort of establishing a framework that they have to work around or work with preemptively. Finally, I want to talk about the status quo status quo option, which is essentially inaction. For a lot of people who are proponents of the metaverse, this might be the ideal option for them, mostly because they'll look at the metaverse, they look at the ideal of the metaverse and believe that companies like Microsoft and Facebook, which had a long history of actually shaping the internet and being major stakeholders of the internet, setting the standards of how we as users actually engage with the services, as being the ones that could actually fully realize a metaverse in reality. Regardless of that, though, my initial recommendations that I want to propose for you all today is a combination of options 1 and 2, creating this antitrust framework of deterring gatekeepers in a metaverse sort of development context, as well as legislating interoperability. I believe that this will best promote the principles of what the advocates of the metaverse want, or at least what the traditional advocates want, as well as deterring some anti-competitive behavior that we can see within the industry. While I recognize that certain innovation might end up being deterred because of the consolidation of options of corporations will be limited in this sense, I do believe it will alleviate risk overall. And just as some final remarks, whether metaverse will be realized or not, we can't really say for certain. What the user demand will be and how users will respond to whatever is created by these firms, we can't say for certain. But we can predict are the actions that corporations will most likely take to actually realize this and to set the standards of this. And this is what we should regulate. This is what we should anticipate for. And this is what we need to address. Thank you.